pounding on my front door was so aggressive it made the windows rattle. I froze mid-step, holding a cup of coffee that suddenly felt like a ticking bomb. On the other side stood Karen, the notorious HOA president, glaring at me as if I'd committed the crime of the century. "You're trespassing!" she screamed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I blinked, completely stunned. Trespassing? On my own property? It wasn't the first time Karen had come storming over. But this felt different. There was fire in her eyes, that mix of entitlement and self-righteousness that I'd learned to fear. I think you're mistaken," I stammered, trying to keep my voice calm. "This is my home. My deed is right here." But she wasn't listening. Instead, she shoved a stack of papers in my face. HOA rules, guidelines, fines, letters, all claiming that I'd violated some arbitrary rule about fence, placement, and landscaping aesthetics. "You can't just do whatever you want. We have standards here," she barked, pointing at the carefully mowed grass that had been part of my family for generations. As she ranted, I felt a mix of disbelief and anger rising inside me. I'd followed every regulation, every code, and yet here she was, acting like a dictator on a mission. The audacity! My neighbor watched from their porch, clearly enjoying the spectacle, but I couldn't let this go. Not today. Then she dropped the bombshell. "I'm calling the sheriff," she hissed. "You need to leave immediately, or—" That's when I smiled. Calmly. Confidently. Because I knew exactly what was coming next. Karen might have called herself the enforcer of neighborhood rules, but the law was on my side. I reached for the folder where my property deed was safely stored, feeling the leather cover under my fingertips. This wasn't just paper. It was proof. A shield against her tyranny. Moments later, the distant sound of sirens filled the air. Karen's eyes widened, her confidence crumbling with each approaching second. The sheriff arrived, a tall man with a no-nonsense expression, and Karen immediately tried to launch into her spiel. But one look at me, then at my deed, and everything changed. Her mouth opened, words trapped somewhere between fury and embarrassment. It was a victory I hadn't expected to feel quite so acutely, a reminder that standing your ground matters. But as I watched her stumble, trying to recover her authority, I knew this confrontation was far from over. Karen didn't just disappear, she plotted, schemed. And I had a feeling this was the beginning of a very long battle. The tension in the air was palpable, and I couldn't shake the sense that she would strike again. The question was, how far would she go next? The moment the sheriff left, Karen's expression shifted from shock to simmering anger. She didn't just accept defeat, she plotted. I could see it in the tight set of her jaw and the way her eyes darted around, calculating her next move. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was personal. The next morning, I stepped outside to find bright orange notice, signs stapled to every tree along my property line. "Violation of HOA regulations," they screamed in bold letters. Almost comically dramatic. I sighed. Karen had escalated, and she clearly thought a few neon signs would intimidate me. Instead, they made me laugh. She was trying so hard to assert control over a place that wasn't hers. Neighbors started whispering, some out of curiosity, some out of frustration. One of them leaned over the fence and asked, "Is she really going to take this all the way?" I shrugged, trying to appear casual, but inside I knew she was capable of extreme measures. Karen had a reputation for turning minor conflicts into full-blown neighborhood spectacles, and I wasn't going to be the first person to back down. By midday, I noticed movement near the property line. Karen had called a landscaping crew, but not for any legitimate reason. They were there, ostensibly inspecting my yard, taking photos of my fence, my garden, even the spacing between the shrubs. It felt like harassment, pure and simple. I stepped out, clipboard in hand, trying to assess the situation rationally. "Hello," I said, forcing a polite tone. "Can I help you?" The crew froze. Karen's voice rose behind them, shrill and commanding. "Document everything! He's violating the HOA! Every inch!" I realized this wasn't just about aesthetics or rules. It was an orchestrated effort to paint me as the villain in the neighborhood. I took a deep breath. Retaliation doesn't have to mean confrontation. I returned to my house and started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, videos. Every action Karen took became part of a growing record. This wasn't just about proving I was right. It was about protecting my home from someone who had no boundaries. Hours passed, and Karen didn't stop. She posted online, sent emails to every neighbor, trying to sway public opinion. But every attempt felt desperate, almost comical. Meanwhile, I remained calm, letting the evidence build. Karen was underestimating the power of preparation, the weight of the truth. As the sun set, I realized this was bigger than a simple HOA dispute. Karen wasn't just meddling. She was trying to control an entire narrative, painting me as a trespasser while hiding her own overreach. And yet I had a plan, a careful, calculated response that she would never see coming. Little did she know, the next confrontation wouldn't be about signs, emails, or gossip. It would be a lesson she'd never forget. The following morning, I woke with a sense of purpose. Karen had unleashed her barrage of signs, online posts, and unsolicited inspections. But I had something far more powerful than any neon, notice, or dramatic email: the truth. My property deed, meticulously organized records, and a detailed timeline of her antics were ready to expose her overreach. I started by reviewing the photos and videos I had taken over the past few days. Every bright orange sign, every unnecessary visit from her hired crew, every shouted accusation, all documented. I compiled everything into a simple but compelling timeline, noting dates, times, and actions. This wasn't just for my own peace of mind. It was armor against the storm Karen was determined to unleash. Then I drafted a concise letter to the HOA board, attaching the evidence. I highlighted her repeated harassment, her attempts to misrepresent facts, and the ways she had ignored legal boundaries. I kept my tone calm and professional, because the more rational I appeared, the more irrational she would seem. Karen thrived on drama, but facts had a way of quieting chaos. By mid-afternoon, the sheriff returned for a follow-up at my request. I wanted an impartial witness, someone official who could see firsthand that Karen's claims were baseless. When he walked through my yard, nodding at the fences and boundaries, I could tell he already understood the story. We went over my compiled evidence together, and I could see the shift in his demeanor. This wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. It was a clear pattern of harassment. I called Karen and invited her to review the documentation with me. Her reaction was predictable: outrage, disbelief, and that familiar tone of entitlement. "This isn't fair," she shouted. "You can't do this." I stayed calm, letting her anger fill the room while I quietly laid out every piece of evidence. The sheriff observed silently, his presence a subtle but undeniable reminder that the law was on my side. As the discussion continued, Karen's composure began to crack. She realized that her tactics, threats, signs, social pressure, had no legal footing. The deed, the documented timeline, and the sheriff's impartial validation left her cornered. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind, desperately searching for a loophole that didn't exist. By the end of the day, the tension had shifted. Karen slinked away, muttering about appeals and neighborhood committees. But I knew her power had been broken. My home was safe, and more importantly, I had the satisfaction of knowing that preparation, patience, and documentation had won over chaos and intimidation. But even as the sun set, a nagging thought lingered. Karen wasn't finished. This battle had revealed her determination and cunning, and while the immediate threat was neutralized, the next move could come at any time. The question now wasn't whether she would strike again. It was when. The days that followed were quiet, almost surreal. Karen had retreated, her threats and public outbursts replaced with silence. My neighbors, once spectators to her tirades, now nodded in recognition whenever we crossed paths. Word had spread. The trespasser wasn't trespassing at all. She had been outmaneuvered by someone who had simply known their rights. I spent the morning walking the property, inspecting fences, trimming hedges, and taking a deep breath of satisfaction. Every corner of the yard felt like a small victory, a reminder that standing firm matters. The ordeal had been exhausting, nerve-wracking, and at times infuriating, but it had also been a lesson in patience, preparation, and the power of documentation. Despite the relief, I remained vigilant. Karen was clever and persistent, and while she had been exposed this time, I knew she might attempt another maneuver. The HOA board had received my letter, the sheriff had been involved, and my neighbors were aware of the truth, but awareness alone wasn't enough. I began setting up a simple record-keeping system. Emails, photos, videos, and notes, all time-stamped and organized. If Karen tried to strike again, I would be ready. Then came an unexpected twist. Karen, humiliated and frustrated, reached out with a peace-offering tone that didn't quite reach her eyes. She suggested mediation and proposed working together to keep the neighborhood harmonious. I paused, considering her words. Was it genuine or just another ploy to regain control? I chose caution, replying politely but firmly, stating that my focus was maintaining my property and respecting legal boundaries. Any further communication would need to go through official channels. Over the next few weeks, the tension slowly eased. I noticed Karen still posting online about minor HOA issues, but nothing targeted at me. The orange signs disappeared. The landscapers stopped their unnecessary inspections. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, the kind that comes after weathering a storm and emerging unscathed. The experience left me with a sense of empowerment. Standing up for oneself doesn't always require confrontation. It requires strategy, patience, and knowing your rights. Karen had underestimated me, assuming that intimidation and drama could force compliance. Instead, she was the one who had to step back, confronted by facts, law, and evidence. As I sipped my coffee on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I reflected on the journey. A simple piece of paper, the deed had been my shield, documentation had been my sword, and patience had been my armor. In the end, the lesson was clear. Confidence in your own truth is more powerful than the loudest voice in the neighborhood. Karen had lost, but I had gained more than just peace. I had a story, a victory, and the knowledge that no one could take what was rightfully mine if I stood firm. And somehow, that felt like the real triumph. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more wild HOA Karen encounters, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done if you were in my shoes. Let's see who's braver. And don't forget to like this video if you loved watching Karen get exposed.